By 1850, the East India Company was not a trading company that happened to have an army. It was a government that happened to still file paperwork in London. It ruled over 200 million people. It collected more revenue than most European states. It ran courts, built roads, laid telegraph wire, and kept a military that no Indian prince could match. How did you run a subcontinent from a counting house? You built a machine, and like every machine, it had a purpose and a price. Maps, money, decisions. This is Tareekh ka Hisaab. Start with the instrument that made everything else possible, the army. The company's army was Indian soldiers under British officers, sepoys, from the Persian sipahi, soldier, enlisted for steady pay, rations, and a pension. By the 1850s, hundreds of thousands of men served under company colors across the subcontinent. The British Army of the Crown was a fraction of that. Now here is the structural fact that matters. The cost of that army was paid not from London, but from Indian land revenue. India financed its own occupation, and the arrangement carried its own logic. The company needed Indian soldiers to conquer more land. More land produced more revenue. More revenue paid for more soldiers. The machine fed itself. Every recruit who joined weighed his options: subsistence farming with no guarantee against famine, service with a local prince whose finances might collapse next season, or the company, which paid reliably, in coin, and offered a career structure. On those terms, the company looked like stability, and so the machine acquired its manpower, one willing enlistment at a time. Follow the money, as we always do, and the money has a direction. Once the company collected land revenue in India, it used that revenue to purchase Indian goods, cloth, indigo, opium, and ship them to Britain. The proceeds were booked as trade profit in London. What looked like commerce was actually a transfer: Indian resources, bought with Indian taxes, and the proceeds leaving India permanently. This is what critics would later call the drain of wealth, a contested analytical framework most famously articulated by Dadabhai Naoroji from 1867 onward. The counter-argument was that India received infrastructure, rule of law, and security. What is not disputed, the direction of the net capital flow was outward, and the decision to structure it that way was made in London, not in Delhi. In April 1853, the first passenger train in India ran from Bombay to Thane, 34 kilometers, 3 steam locomotives, and about 400 passengers. The railways transformed movement, trade, and communication in ways that still shape the subcontinent. And they did this genuinely. But follow the incentives. Who built the railways? British contractors, using capital raised in London under a government guarantee that promised investors a fixed return of 5% annually, paid from Indian revenue regardless of whether any particular line made a profit. India paid the interest on the loans that financed the tracks on which British goods were then transported into Indian markets. The telegraph followed the same logic. The first line from Calcutta to Agra opened in 1853, the same year as the first railway. By 1857, you could send a message from one end of the subcontinent to the other in hours. It was a military and administrative nervous system. Canals irrigated farmland and created new taxable agricultural output. Every improvement had a dual purpose: development for the settled population, control for the ruling power. The genius of the machine was that these two purposes were not in contradiction, at least not yet. Governor-General Lord Dalhousie arrived in India in 1848. He was 35 years old, efficient, impatient, and possessed of a conviction that British rule was unambiguously beneficial, and that more of it was therefore better. He formalized something called the Doctrine of Lapse, the principle: if a prince who ruled under company paramountcy died without a natural male heir, his state lapsed to the company. Adopted heirs, the normal succession practice for centuries, would not be recognized. Dalhousie framed this as legal and administrative tidiness. The real calculation was simpler. The company's treasury was under strain. Direct annexation produced direct revenue. Every lapsed state was a balance sheet improvement. The states that fell: Satara in 1848, Jaitpur and Sambalpur in 1849, Jhansi in 1853, where Rani Lakshmi Bai's adopted son was denied succession, Nagpur in 1854. Then, in 1856, Awadh was annexed not by lapse, but on the declared grounds of misgovernance. The Nawab of Awadh had been a loyal client for a generation. Loyalty, it turned out, was not a long-term contract. Among those watching, the company's own sepoys. Many of them, particularly in the Bengal Army, came from Awadh. They had families there. They now watched their home territory absorbed, its courts dissolved, its nobles made nobodies. The machine was running efficiently, and it was generating heat. Run the numbers on what the company had built by 1856. An army of hundreds of thousands, Indian in composition, British in command, Indian in cost. A revenue system that extracted from Bengal to Bombay with barely a year of slack for famine or crop failure. A railway grid financed by Indian tax guarantees. A telegraph network that served military deployment first. And a succession of annexations that had eliminated or subordinated every major independent power on the subcontinent. The company would have called this order. Its critics called it a trap. The peasant who missed his ryotwari payment in a drought year called it ruin. What no one called it yet was stable. A machine built for extraction, run at maximum efficiency, with no margin for error and no mechanism for feedback. This is a description of something that will break. The Bengal Army was a particular pressure vessel. Its sepoys were proud, with their own codes of honor, caste, and service. They had watched their homeland annexed. Their religious anxieties were ignored or dismissed. Their promotions were capped by the British officers above them. And they were now being asked to serve farther from home than their enlistment term specified. In early 1857, a new rifle arrived in the cantonments, the Enfield. It required a greased cartridge to be bitten before loading. The rumor that spread, that the grease was a mixture of cow fat and pork lard, defiling Hindu and Muslim alike, may or may not have been accurate. What was accurate was that the sepoys believed it, and in a machine already running at the edge of its tolerances, belief was enough. Next time, the breaking point. The company governed India with a kind of cold administrative brilliance. It separated land from its owners, revenue from its producers, and soldiers from their homelands, and made each of these transfers look like a system rather than a choice. But a system that takes everything and returns only order is, in the end, making a bet that the people inside it have no other move. In 1857, they found one. Next time, Meerut, Delhi, Jhanpur, Lucknow. The Great Rebellion and the question of what to call it. This is Tareekh ka Hisaab.